Good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Serge. So welcome to another episode of Search for the Truth. Today, I'm really excited to have this guest, Miss Heather. So good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Dr. Serge.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. I know it's pretty early where you are in California.
My pleasure.
Good. So tell us a little bit about you, yourself, and why you are passionate about what you do, because I've heard, I know over the years people like us decided to do this for most of the time personal reasons. They want to help better, they want to help people, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, my health journey began in 1994 when I started urinating blood. Went to the doctor and they did a bunch of testing and it came back that I had an autoimmune kidney disease. And at that time, I wasn't a full-time student, got kicked off of my parents' health insurance, and then could not get health insurance for having a chronic pre-existing disease. And I felt pretty helpless. They told me that I was looking at 5 years and I would either need a transplant or dialysis. And not having insurance and access to the medical system, that was pretty frightening. So I ended up getting pregnant and going through clinics, and I got very, very ill. And after the birth of my first daughter, I knew that I needed to do something in order to preserve my health. And that's where my passion for research began. And to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself on how I was going to do this by myself. When I graduated high school, I graduated with a 1.7 GPA. So I was, pretty intimidated of just navigating the Dewey Decimal System at the library, which kind of dates me in terms of how long ago this was. And so as I started learning things, I started feeling better. I had been diagnosed with depression and anxiety at 11 years old. I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional home and there was a lot of chaos. And so I had a lot of digestive issues. And over time, this led to, me wanting to numb out, using drugs. That's what, by the time I was 18 and had this diagnosis of this kidney disease, I was in pretty bad shape. My diet pretty much consisted of Mountain Dew, Cheetos, Little Debbie snacks, any kind of sugar I could get my hands on. And so as I started implementing these small changes, that depression, that anxiety, it just kind of like lifted. And I was like, whoa, what is this? All of a sudden I had energy. I felt better. I was motivated to learn more. And so that really led me down this path of wanting to, really explore health and wellness outside of our conventional medicine practices. Because at the time when I got diagnosed, doctors told me that there was nothing I could do to preserve my kidney health, that diet, lifestyle, none of that would make any change in terms of what my prognosis and expectation was. And so now fast forward 27 years later, I have brought immense quality to my life just by embracing some lifestyle habit changes that have empowered me to really be able to step into living my best life. And so I'm motivated to share with others because I hear it over and over and over, that they just have to take medication. There's surgeries that can be done, but for the most part, when it comes to chronic disease, autoimmune disease, digestive health disorders, it's pretty bleak, in terms of the conventional recommendations. There's just not a lot of hope. And then another thing is that, we're told genetics are the main the main factor in terms of what these health outcomes are going to look like for us. And the truth is that, about 1% of genetics play a role when it comes to disease, and that 99% of it is lifestyle based. And so for me, back in that time, lifestyle was the trigger to allow this autoimmune disease to become active. And so I love everything that I do. It's so empowering. It's so powerful. And I just want to share the messages with the world.
That's a really, really impressive stories, actually. And you touch on many different points on your testimony. And one of the points that really is fascinating is when you mentioned conventional medicine. So
Yeah.
you're right, a lot of those doctors don't really know what to do to have those chronic issues. I mean, you had a really poor diagnosis,
Right.
but with nutrition and healing the body naturally, you reverse and you brought back your kidney functions to normal.
Yes.
That's amazing to me. That speaks volume.
I just recently had a follow-up with a nephrologist just to check everything out, make sure creatinine and all of my, levels are within normal ranges. And my nephrologist was like, "Who are you and how did you do this? And do you have any cards? Because I have thousands of patients who need this."
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting. I really truly believe that I have reversed the aging process. I have been able to take control of my health. I'm a big believer in 80-20. 80% of the time I am, making good, healthy nutrition choices. The other 20%, I allow myself to indulge here and there on things that, I desire, but it's not a overindulgence by any means.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Because sometimes people, when they use that philosophy, that concept, they go crazy for 20%. So
Right.
you really had to be moderate in your food options,
Right. Yeah.
By the way, to all the listeners, if you have any questions for Heather, please let me know in the comment section so I can ask her. So from your journey of the last 25 plus years, you've learned a lot in nutrition.
I have.
So I'm sure you've come across different myths and different misconceptions.
Yes.
To you, from your experience, what is the biggest myth or confusion that you hear a lot from people?
Well, I think that, when it comes to our overall health and wellness, I think that one of the places we miss out on most is really embracing and making effort at managing stress, because stress is ultimately the trigger that's going to create a lot of dysfunction, a lot of dysregulation within the physiology of our body. And in 2012, at that time, I had gone through a very nasty divorce. I was single mom to 2 teenage girls. I was getting a master's degree. And then I was working nights and weekends bartending and then being a dietitian, a clinical dietitian during the day. And so as a result of this, I really was deprived on sleep. I was overusing caffeine as a way to make it through the days. And as a result of all of this, I developed a lot of GI issues. And ultimately, I ended up getting diagnosed with cervical cancer. So what had happened is I had apparently contracted HPV. My immune system was weakened from the lifestyle circumstances. My body wasn't able to fight the HPV off, and it went into full-blown cervical cancer. So at that time, my doctors told me that I needed to have surgery to remove all the cancerous tissue, and that I was going to need to follow up with radiation and chemotherapy to ensure that all of the cancer was eradicated. And I agreed to have the surgery, but I told my doctors, absolutely not. I would not do radiation or chemotherapy. And the reason is because I knew that I was not embracing the lifestyle factors that were going to have the biggest impact on my overall health, but specifically my immune function. Yeah. So being overstressed, utilizing too much caffeine, not getting enough sleep were the perfect, factors to compromise my immune system function. And so I leaned into a lot of lifestyle practices that I had resisted that typically deal with stress management. We've all been told, yoga, meditation, breathing, all of these things are so vital when it comes to our longevity and vitality. And I was like, yeah. I've got exercise, I've got nutrition down, that's enough. And when this happened to me, it really was a wake-up call that nutrition and exercise cannot be optimized within the body if we are not taking into consideration our stress management. because ultimately that is the beginning of the downfall. If we aren't controlling our stress, then nutrition, exercise, yes, they're great, but they're not going to be able to be optimized. We're not going to be able to absorb nutrients efficiently to support immune system function. We're literally in a state of survival at all time.
Well, really good point. And I agree 100% with you. I think stress is the main killer, right? You can connect all those chronic diseases to stress or stress management, right? So the body is not able to cope with the stress. So what is the connection with stress, gut, and immune system? Because to me, they all make sense together, right? So how do you go about helping the stress and these different components of the body?
Well, the bottom line is our brain cannot differentiate between physical, mental, and emotional stress. If it perceives that there is a stressor, there is a very specific hormonal cascade that's going to occur, causing things like cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine to be released into the bloodstream to stimulate the central nervous system for that fight or flight response. And when this happens, one of the byproducts of this is that the blood becomes acidic. We start producing metabolic acids, and these metabolic acids create a more acidic pH in our bloodstream, which then puts our lungs, our brains, our heart at threat. And so the body is literally allocating all of its resources just to neutralize the pH. And over time, things like vitamin C and zinc and magnesium, these nutrients are depleted. We don't have enough to be able to support normal immune system function and other physiology. And we also create a disruption in the cascade of hormones that are being produced. When we're in that fight or flight, that is considered a primary pathway. That is going to occur if the brain perceives that there's some sort of stress. It can't differentiate that the stress is I've got 200 emails sitting in my, in my inbox that I need to respond to. It literally thinks that there's some major factor that is threatening its life. And so unfortunately, we've been stuck in this kind of cycle for a long period. And decade after decade, we start to lose the ability to produce hormones efficiently to support aging, to support healing and repair, to support immune system function. The gut becomes inflamed. It's no longer absorbing nutrients efficiently. Things that aren't supposed to be getting into the bloodstream are getting into the bloodstream, and therefore triggering a bigger immune system response. But the immune system is so taxed, it's just trying to keep our pH at a neutralized state just so that we can breathe, keep our heart beating, and our brain functioning. So it's a very vicious cycle, and there's just not enough awareness around the stimulant that's creating and contributing to all of the chronic disease. The prevalence we have here in the US is just absolutely ridiculous. And we have the most advanced technology practices, yet we're the sickest country in the world,
Is that crazy, right?
It is and it isn't.
Yeah.
It is and it isn't. When you look at the broken systems that have been put in place, it's profitable. It's profitable. And so there's not going to be a lot of advocacy for change when ultimately it's making a lot of money, banking off of our illness.
Yes, actually, I was reading a report from an economist, and they were looking at conventional medicine and holistic medicine, a bit what we do. And they found out that for every dollar spent in holistic medicine or alternative medicine, they lose $40. So at the end of the day, it is a money game, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at the big picture and I look at other countries and their practices, specifically countries that provide healthcare for their citizens, these countries have very stringent regulations around food practice, what's allowed in their food systems.
Yeah.
And they also support a much healthier lifestyle in terms of not being overly stressed with all of these demands. And when we look at their health outcomes compared to the health outcomes here in the United States, it's pretty staggering to see, wow, the government's responsible for their health care. Therefore, they want to make sure that their citizens are set up for success when it comes to minimizing the likeliness of developing chronic disease because they're footing the bill. Here in the United States, we have private systems, and it's coming at the expense of our health.
Good point here. Nothing else to say, actually. It makes sense that everything is about money when the bill is transferred to us, the citizens. We know that the Americans are stressed out. We depend on coffee, on Red Bulls, on sugar. But what do we need to do from a nutrition point of view with food to start breaking that vicious cycle?
Well, let's start with coffee, because the average American wakes up and they have a cup of coffee on an empty stomach, right? Yeah. And then a lot of them are vaping or they're using nicotine products. These things are perceived stressors. So when we put these chemicals into our body, it triggers a stress response. So if we're consuming caffeine on an empty stomach, that immediately is going to stimulate the cortisol response, and the cells are going to be bathed in that cortisol, which ultimately are going to make these cells insulin resistant. Cortisol is like a big old bouncer standing in front of the door telling insulin, sorry, not today. You can't let glucose in.
Yeah.
Up to dress code. And so as a result of this, people, by the time evening hits, when that cortisol has finally worn off and the cells are no longer bathed and insulin can actually get glucose into the cell, we have ravenous hunger. And more often than less, that ravenous hunger that we have is for high carbohydrate, refined processed foods that are high in sugar, high in fat. And so we indulge, right? We think we have willpower, but there are hormones that are dictating what our body needs, because the body has perceived that it's been energy deprived all day. We've been on that blood sugar roller coasters of highs and lows with dysregulation of blood sugars. And so in the evening, when people are trying to hold it together and, eat their salad and be healthy, their brain won't let them. Their body is literally craving these undesirable foods. And then when they indulge in those foods, they perceive that as lack of willpower. And then they start shaming themselves. And when they start shaming themselves, that is a perceived stressor stimulating another cortisol response. And then this is going to interrupt their ability to produce melatonin efficiently so that they can get that good quality sleep, right? So we're stuck in this vicious cycle. Another thing people don't realize when it comes to caffeine. So my advice is, if you're going to drink caffeine in the morning, make sure you do it while consuming food or after you have had breakfast, so that it's not on an empty stomach, so that it won't be as large of a perceived stressor. The other thing is that coffee has a shelf life of 14 hours. So most people have caffeine fluctuating in their bloodstream at all times. This is contributing to dysregulated sleep cycle, waking up in the middle of the night, that feeling of panic, anxiety, can't fall back to sleep. So more often than less, it's because of the caffeine that's in the bloodstream that's never really cycles out.
Yeah, that's really interesting that most people, like you said, start the day on the right foot, right? They don't do what they need to do to nourish your body.
Right.
I mean, we're looking for quick fixes, right? Go in, you don't sleep well, have more energy, and so on. Like you said, we are stuck.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people use melatonin as a way to break the cycle. So is that a good option to try to get more sleep and get up more refreshed and better?
Absolutely. I think that taking into consideration and evaluating caffeine use. I work with clients that they're drinking 5 energy drinks a day on top of several cups of coffee.
Wow.
When I do the math for them to show them what they've done just in that one day, it's going to take potentially 5-6 days for the amount of caffeine that's in their bloodstream at that one time to cycle out. But then they wake up the next day and they do it again. And so we have these very, very large concentrations of caffeine in the bloodstream that never cycle out. So melatonin can be beneficial. However, it's not the solution. And most people who take melatonin, they take it right before bed. And that's not going to do enough. My recommendation is if you want to utilize melatonin as a sleep aid to support your sleep cycle, you need to do it right after your evening meal so that it can start building up those higher concentration levels. And most people are just misguided by medical practitioners when utilizing melatonin as a tool.
And it comes down to the gut again, because most melatonin is produced, I think it's 400 times more melatonin produced by the gut than the pineal gland. So you need to support your gut.
Yes.
So what kind of food do you recommend, or what kind of diet? What's your philosophy on this concept?
Oh, you know what? I wish that I had my pictures available to show you my recent colonoscopy, because I am so proud of these pictures. They're just so beautiful. So I had I'm at that age, I'm in my mid 40s. And so I had the first colonoscopy. And when I woke up from my procedure, my doctor came in and he started laughing. He was like, hey, he goes, I just want to let you know, you have one of the most beautiful colons I have ever seen. It's so pink. It is so healthy. The tissue is just phenomenal. And so he said, what do you do? And I said, well, it's a combination of my nutrition. But for the last 5 years, one thing that I have really embraced is the use of collagen peptides. So that I have a compromised kidney function, for me, peptides and proteins, the marrow of my bones have been slightly damaged. So I don't produce ferritin. I don't produce certain proteins and collagen peptides that are essential to keep tissue healthy and regenerating. So for 5 years, every morning I've had 1 scoop of collagen in my with my breakfast routine. And for me, when I saw those pictures, I knew for a fact that collagen was a huge contributor of the health of my intestinal lining. I eat a diet, I would consider myself predominantly plant-based. However, I have to add animal proteins into my diet because of compromised kidney function. When most people would recycle proteins in their nephrons, mine get excreted through urine. And so in 2007, I had tried to follow a vegan diet for about 2 years and became extremely ill, so ill that it almost resulted in death. And that's when I had to reintroduce animal proteins back in so that my body could meet its needs, because it couldn't build them on its own from the loss that I get through urine.
Yeah.
So I eat predominantly high fiber. I think fiber is one of the, key components that most of the population is missing out on. I believe the statistic is the average American gets somewhere between 7 and 10 grams of fiber a day. And ultimately, we need more than 35 grams a day to support our microbiota, to support promoting healthy bowel movements, to help with removing unhealthy hormones that are, fluctuating, as well as cholesterol. So fiber is one of the missing components in most people's diet.
So what do you mean by fibers? Can you give us some specifics?
Yeah, so we have 2 kinds of fibers that the body is dependent on. We have insoluble fiber and soluble fiber. So for instance, if I were to eat an apple a day, I would be getting both soluble and insoluble fiber from the whole apple, from the skin on the apple, and then inside the apple we have pectin. And so combination of both of those would help me ensure that I'm getting all sources of fiber that are necessary. I'm not a big advocate for using things like psyllium husk and kind of powders as a fiber supplement, because most of the time it contributes to actual constipation. These are very hydrolyzed sources, and they require an immense amount of water. And again, because so many people are overusing caffeine, they're dehydrated. They're not meeting their fluid needs. So these powders are just going to contribute to the problem instead of resolve the problem, because there's lack of hydration and lack of bulk, the bulk that we need to help push things through the digestive tract. And then again, stress shuts down the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're not in that state of rest and digest. We're not stimulating peristalsis to push things through the GI tract. So it's just a very vicious cycle.
You're right. And like you say, a lot of people are stuck in that vicious cycle.
Yes.
There are questions from Mr. Alex. He said, since that you are pro-fiber, does that mean that you are against the carnivore diet?
No, I think that every person has very individualized needs, and there are certain individuals that are going to tolerate a carnivore diet better than a plant-based diet. I'm actually going to be recording a podcast to go vegan or not, because there's so many myths out there.
Yeah.
And, for me, I have to have animal proteins in my diet. I will not survive. So I know the vitality of incorporating animal proteins into my diet for my overall health. So yeah, I think that it's a very individualized, recommendation.
I agree with you, because I do have some patients who are vegan and they do really well. And some patients are carnivore or more keto and they do really well. So everybody's a little bit different.
Yes.
So we have another question from Miss Carla. So she said, I just started having caffeinated drinks, to be exact. Zip. I've never heard of that. Zip. Anyway, it's one of those drinks. Should I stop, or should I drink coffee or sodas or not?
Well, here's the deal. Most people believe that caffeine gives them energy, and it's quite the opposite. It actually really depletes our adrenal system and minimizes our ability to produce energy on our own efficiently. So I always recommend for individuals, less is always more. So if you're someone who just recently has started this habit, I would try to kick it to the curb sooner than later before, it wears down the system. And then we are under the impression that we can't survive a day without the caffeine.
Yeah.
That's where I would start. So, no sense in picking up a bad habit if it's not necessary. But most people think coffee gives them energy, and it doesn't. It actually depletes them. Another thing people don't take into consideration is that a lot of coffee contains alpha toxins and mycotoxins that are mold spores that get into the bloodstream and that create a lot of havoc. Coffee is grown in hot, humid, environments. It sits in warehouses. Those mold spores start growing on the coffee bean. And then once they're ground out, these mold spores become dormant. And then once we brew that cup of coffee, start sipping on it, those mold spores become reactivated in our bloodstream, and they start wreaking havoc. Chronic headaches, sinus issues, achy joints. There's a lot of inflammatory components that are compromised due to these myco and alpha toxins that can be found in coffee.
Really good point. And coffee beans, I believe, is one of the crops that they use the most pesticides and chemicals on them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's funny because we don't take into consideration the amount of chemicals that we're consuming on a daily basis when we're eating a traditional standard American diet, that SAD diet. We don't realize the constant irritation that we're subjecting the GI tract to. It's, over time, it becomes very inflamed, and we start developing what's called leaky gut. Yeah. And leaky gut used to be, I would be a quack, right? If I used the term leaky gut, they would be like, oh my God, here's one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
We finally have validated evidence that it's real. It exists. It's a very, very problematic, component. 70% of our immune system lies within our digestive tract.
Yeah.
If our digestive tract is compromised, our overall health is going to be compromised. And truth is, stress management is one of the biggest factors that are compromising that permeability of our digestive tract.
So let's get back to the stress component again, because this is a really major component. Because I read some studies that shows that when you are under stress, you actually deplete 10 times more, faster, I should say, your nutrients, your vitamins, and your minerals. So you become deficient.
Well, yeah, because number one, we're not able to appropriately methylate certain vitamins and minerals because of the change in the hydrochloric acid in our gut. So we miss out there. Most people don't chew their food efficiently, so we miss out on the mechanical digestion as well. So now we're down 2 parts already, and we haven't even gotten to the small intestine.
Yeah.
So, we have these large particles of food that get into the small intestine, and they cannot be broken down appropriately. But the microbiota, we have about 3 to 8 pounds of bacteria sitting in our digestive tract. And these bacteria can ferment these large particles of food. They can use them as energy and support overgrowth of bad bacteria. This becomes very problematic. So with the stress, 70% of our immune system lies in the GI tract. We also produce a majority of our serotonin in our GI. Yeah. And so if we have compromised permeability, if we have chronic inflammation in the GI tract, this is going to have a major impact on our mental health, our cognitive function, our ability to build proteins and neurotransmitters and have appropriate antioxidants. And then also another thing I do want to go back and mention is that when we're in that perceived stress response and we're producing metabolic acids that are making the pH of the blood become more acidic, we are literally allocating all of those nutrient resources available just to neutralize the pH of our blood. So that is part of how we become so deficient with our vitamins and minerals and even some macronutrients.
Good point. Is from what I'm getting from you, diet is really important, but there's more than diet. You need to handle the stress. So what are the few tips that you can tell the listeners how to really handle the stress?
Yeah. So, the reality is that diet can be a perceived stressor, right? So if we're consuming a lot of conventionally farmed products that are treated heavily with pesticides, there's food colorings and a lot of additives into these food items, those in themselves are going to be a perceived stressor, which are going to keep us in that state of fight or flight. So we really have to start recognizing where we have the ability to start minimizing that perceived stress that the body is under. For me, I feel diet is one of the best places to start. And I also, people might think, oh no, we're going to go woo-woo here. But the reality is that when we're depressed, when we're anxious, 90% of mental health disorders are actually nutrient deficiencies that have not been defined. So individuals go to the doctor, they state, hey, I'm feeling tired. I've lost motivation for doing the things that I love. And the doctors say, well, here, you must be depressed. Take this medication. In 3 months, 6 months, you're going to start feeling better. Well, 3 months, 6 months go. You're not feeling any better. Why? Because we haven't addressed the root issue, which are the nutrient deficiencies. And all the while that we're being dependent on these pharmaceuticals, it's compromising the permeability of our gut from the chemicals that are added into these medicines. It's wreaking havoc on our liver. Our poor livers, man, our poor livers. I just want to give my liver a little hug and say thank you for how hard you work.
Yes.
But the reality is that, if we're depressed, if we're anxious, if we're low energy, it's going to be very difficult to want to put energy and effort into preparing meals that are going to be more nutritious, right? Yeah. So I'm a big advocate for small steps. first, evaluate your caffeine use. Look at your hydration. What's happening? Are you hydrated? Those are two really easy places to start to help support our gut as well as our mental health. And then I'm a big advocate for slowly adding things into the diet, not trying to take everything away at one time. If you choose to swap out one of your snacks for an apple and some natural peanut butter or almond butter, that in itself is going to be a step in the right direction. When we're in these low vibrational states, you know, these emotional states of depression, of anxiety, of overwhelm, we're vibrating at a very low energy frequency, and our cells, because of those metabolic acids that are being produced, they're getting lodged into the mitochondria of our cell, creating disruption of the way that electrons and protons are functioning in our mitochondria. So when we have this disruption, our cells are vibrating at a very low state, right? So like craves like. When we're depressed, we want high sugar, high fat, refined processed foods, because that's what the cell is needing to match its vibrational state. So as we slowly start to incorporate more nutrient dense foods, we slowly start to improve that cellular function, which allows us to raise that vibrational state, which is going to help support our emotional state as well. So
really, really, really good point here. And I have to agree with you that our liver really worked a lot harder what we used to what it used to do back in the days. I mean, we're exposed to so many toxins, and what I see clinically sometimes is as we start cleansing, you know, avoiding the toxins and detox and eating better, the cortisol level stabilizes, the body gets stronger, and it's much easier to do what we need to do to get healthier.
Yeah. So, you know, back to what are some tips? More often than less, when I start working with individuals, we don't even address food. We start addressing the other lifestyle factors, like, are you drinking tap water?
Yeah.
Because tap water is so toxic. That's putting a lot of stress on the liver. Let's start swapping that out for spring water or filtered water that has the minerals added back into it so that we can adequately hydrate. Stop using plastic, swap things out for glass. As we start making these small changes, we start minimizing our exposure to these dangerous toxins that are perceived stressors, and it allows for our body to get into a more regulated state that's going to help support our mental health, which will actually support our ability to start making nutrition changes and staying consistent with those nutrition changes.
Good point. And we have a question here from Carla. She's concerned about her son. Her son is 12 years old, and he cannot sleep without taking melatonin at night. So what does she have to do?
You know, it's really, really sad because the amount of anxiety that we see in adolescence is through the roof. And so, you know, it's like, is it the chicken or the egg? Which came first? You know, we really don't know. But I can tell you from my own experience, I was an overly stressed child, and I had a lot of anxiety. I did not sleep well at all for majority of my life. Sleeping was something that was a real challenge. And so trying to support making some nutrition changes can be extremely beneficial in helping his ability to sleep better. But I would also evaluate what's going on in his life that is, you know, creating havoc, creating chaos, creating stress for him that maybe he doesn't have the ability to articulate. And then once you can identify what those factors are, you can start making changes. Children are under an immense amount of pressure. They're constantly stimulated with technology. They're in front of blue screens all the time, which are stimulating and triggering cortisol production, which is going to naturally suppress our melatonin. So we really have to take a look at what's going on. What does their 24 hours look like? And where is there some room for improvement? How can we get them out in nature? How can we get them outside playing and just being kids instead of being so focused on academic progress and being in competitive sports and, you know, all of the things. Kids weren't meant to have the kind of stressors that they live with on a daily basis now.
Yes, I agree with you. Kids are so stressed these days, unbelievable. And kids are so sensitive to the emotional state
Yes.
of the parents. It's unbelievable how they can be affected by some stress that we don't suspect could be an issue for them.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go back to the woo-woo shit here, okay? This is where we have to really take a look at energy and quantum physics. You know, quantum physics was something that was dismissed by our conventional medical practices and our traditional sciences. And there is a energetic biofield that exists around us, and we exchange energy. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It's just exchanged. So if you're living in a home where the parents are stressed out, you know, they're working 12, 16-hour days, they're not getting enough sleep, they're overutilizing caffeine, they're bickering with one another. All of this energy is being transferred to other individuals in the home. And the example I like to use, I'm sure everyone can relate to this. There's been a day where you woke up and you were in the best mood. You're like, oh, I'm vibing so high. And then you go somewhere and you're in a group of people and there's that one bad apple, right? That one person who's just a chronic complainer. Everything is unhappy, blah, 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 blah. And the next thing you know, you realize, your mood has changed. Well, that individual has transferred their negative energy onto you and you are absorbing it. So we really have to be mindful of our environment and how the environment and others are impacting our own behavior and emotional state.
Yes, like you said, I have experienced this so many times. Yeah. So what can you do to prevent that? What can you do to increase your vibration again when you are exposed to somebody or something that negative?
Well, first and foremost, I think it takes awareness. And most of us are so disconnected from ourselves. We aren't present within our own physical and emotional bodies. We're just going through the autopilot motions of life. Yeah. So we have to start taking a step back and recognizing, oh, wait, how do I actually feel? Because if we don't, you know, if we have that moment of awareness where we realize, oh, I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling very anxious or something's just not right, we have to look at the environment. What's going on that was the trigger that changed the way that we were feeling? And once we can start recognizing those patterns, we have the ability to interrupt those patterns, drawing boundaries, changing environments. I'll share with you guys a little research study that I did with a group of women. I had the honor of working with a group of women that all shared the same workspace. And each of these women complained of major digestive distress, that they constantly had stomach aches within 20 minutes of eating. And they're like, I think I have food intolerances. I think I've got allergies. And my intuition kept telling me, nope, this is environmental. There is something environmental going on that is causing these women to not, you know, feel well after their meals. So with all of the women in this group, individually, I removed one for an entire week from their typical lunch setting and had them eat in a different environment. And miraculously, woman after woman, oh my gosh, I didn't have any problems. My stomach felt great. Insert them back into their normal setting. Boom, the problems are back. At the end of this study, what we were able to identify is that there was one bad apple. There was one chronic complainer in the group. And when these women would sit down to have their lunch, this individual would start chiming in with all of her complaints, with all of her nah, 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 nah. And it was literally triggering the stress response in these women, shutting down their parasympathetic nervous system, where they were not able to digest food appropriately. And that what was contributing to all of the pain and bloating and you know, some diarrhea, some constipation. That was what was the contributor.
That's unbelievable. And that reminds me of that experiment that some kids did some time ago. You may have seen it on social media. When you speak love to plants or you
Oh,
speak
yes.
hate,
Yes.
it's two different things. So words can have a major impact on how you feel and your health, actually.
Oh, 100%. Words
Wow.
are huge. Words are very huge. And the thing is that we all have a different perception of what these words mean based on the experiences and the environment we were exposed to. So, I interviewed Dr. Caroline Leaf on my podcast a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about the difference between the brain and the mind. Most people think that our thoughts come from the brain, but they actually come from the mind, which is an energetic field that covers that whole quantum field that exists around us. Our thoughts are not actually who we are, but we don't realize, and we think that these thoughts are our reality and our truths, but they're not. So first and foremost, starting to recognize the thought patterns that we're having, start questioning where did these thoughts actually come from, because most of them are inherited from our environment through conditioning and programming, whether it's social media, the media, our families, our work environments. Majority of us don't have original thoughts. They're just someone else's thoughts that were implanted in our brain, and we're viciously watering those thoughts, whether they're good or bad. We got to support this. But they're not ours. They're not ours to nurture.
Really good point here. Yeah, totally agree with you. And listen, it's been an hour already. Time flies.
Oh my gosh.
There are so many exciting topics here. So as a final note, so what would be one piece of advice you can give the listeners they need to do in order to start their journey?
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, you need to get quiet. You need to have a little alone time so that you can really evaluate what it is that you desire. And then being able to set some realistic goals based upon your current lifestyle habits. So like I mentioned, evaluating caffeine use, looking at your sleep cycle. What does sleep actually look like? Is it because of the caffeine use? Where's your hydration? These are very easy places for us to start. And as we start nurturing those habits and being consistent with them, we increase our confidence. We increase that self-efficacy, that belief within us that we can actually do this. And that's going to empower us to want to start creating more behavior changes.
Really good advice. So how can people reach out to you?
They can find me. My name is Heather Deranja. I'm Heather Deranja on all social media, my website, my YouTube. My podcast is Think Yourself Healthy, and it's on Spotify, iTunes, as well as, all of the other platforms. So those are some easy ways to find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. I was really excited today. So thank you guys for listening. So have a good day.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.